For as long as she could remember, living a life free from the noise of the world was something she always dreamed of. The constant hum of traffic, the never-ending buzz of phone calls, the crowds of people, and the pressure to keep up. It all weighed heavily on her. Over the years, she'd become more and more drained, wondering if there was a way to escape it all. The idea of living in a tiny house seemed like a dream come true. It wasn't about the trendy Instagram photos or the idea of tiny homes being the thing right now. For her, it was a chance to live with purpose and freedom. It was a choice to simplify, to stop worrying about what others had and focus instead on what she truly needed. She had saved every penny for this moment, cutting back on everything from dinners out to buying new clothes to make it happen. And now, with the small, cozy cabin built and everything packed up, she was finally ready to begin her new life. The tiny house sat in a corner of a quiet plot of land she inherited from her grandparents. The land wasn't much, but it had always been a place of comfort, especially when she had visited as a child. There was a certain peace here, with the rolling hills and the tall whispering trees surrounding the property. No cars honked, no neighbors shouted, just the soft breeze and the occasional chirping of birds. Once she moved in, it didn't take long for her to fall in love with the rhythm of a quieter life. The tiny house was warm and inviting, everything designed with care and minimalism in mind. The walls were painted a soft cream with accents of natural wood, a small kitchen with everything she needed, a cozy nook for reading, and a bed tucked in the back corner. It felt like home almost immediately. Her days were spent mostly working on her laptop. She had switched to freelance graphic design a while ago, and the flexibility suited her well. The rest of the time, she spent tending to her garden, reading, or walking along the dirt paths behind the house. Life was slow and steady, and for the first time in years, she found herself truly at ease. But one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees and the orange light spilled across the house, something began to feel different. It started with a faint creaking sound beneath the floorboards. At first, it was barely noticeable, just a soft, almost imperceptible groan, as if the house was settling into the earth. She didn't think much of it. Houses made noises. That's what they did, right? But the next night it happened again. This time it was louder, sharper, like a heavy step echoing beneath the floor. It was as if someone or something was walking under the house. She sat up in bed, her eyes wide in the dim light. The creaking continued for a few more moments, then stopped. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself that it was just the house or maybe the wind making the old wood groan. But something gnawed at her, a feeling of unease she couldn't shake. The next few days were quieter, and she almost forgot about the noise. That was until she let her dog out into the yard. He had always been a calm, easygoing animal, content to roam the yard or curl up next to her while she worked. But that day, as soon as he stepped outside, he froze. His ears perked up and his body went rigid. He stood still for several moments, looking toward the corner of the house near the kitchen. His gaze was fixed, unwavering. The hairs on his back stood up as if he were sensing something she couldn't see. She called him back inside, thinking it was just a squirrel or a stray cat. But he wouldn't budge. He refused to move, still staring at that spot. It was unnerving. "What's wrong with you?" she asked gently, trying to coax him back into the house. But he just barked, his eyes wide with alarm, and continued to stare. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reluctantly turned and walked inside. But he kept his eyes on the corner of the house, and when he entered, he didn't settle in his usual spot by the door. Instead, he curled up next to her feet, shivering as if afraid to be alone. That night, the creaking returned, but this time, it was accompanied by another sound, a faint scratching, like something was being dragged across the ground beneath the house. It wasn't just the usual shift of wood or settling of earth. It sounded purposeful, deliberate. She had heard stories of houses that settled in strange ways, of creaky old buildings and strange noises from old plumbing. But this felt different. It felt like something more. The next day, she decided to investigate. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, she made her way to the small crawl space beneath the house. She had never gone down there before. The thought of it made her uneasy. The space was cramped, the air damp and thick with the smell of earth. But her curiosity got the better of her. She crouched low, shining the flashlight into the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest. There was nothing at first, just dirt, rocks, and the occasional spider web. She was about to turn back when something caught her eye. In the far corner, where the earth was slightly disturbed, there was something shiny. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. As she pulled the object out from the dirt, she realized it was a small weathered wooden panel. It seemed out of place. The wood was different from the rest of the floorboards inside the house. It had been carefully placed, almost as if someone had hidden it there long ago. Her heart raced as she brushed the dirt away, revealing a small compartment underneath. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, maybe a forgotten tool or an old keepsake, but nothing could have prepared her for what was inside. It was a metal box, rusted with age and sealed tight. The box had intricate designs on its surface, almost like symbols or patterns, though the years had worn most of them down. It felt heavy in her hands as she pulled it out and sat back on the ground. She had no idea what it was or how it had gotten there, but there was no denying that it was important. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. She had to open it. With some effort, she pried open the rusty lid. Inside, she found bundles of old, faded letters, a few photographs, and a small velvet pouch that held something even more intriguing, a wedding ring. She held the ring in her hand, turning it over as if it might tell her something. The letters were worn and yellowed with time, but the names on them stood out clearly. Margaret Lewis, her grandmother. She was stunned. Her grandmother had never mentioned anything like this. She had always been kind and gentle, but quiet, reserved. There was never any mention of a past lover, no stories of secret romances. Could this box have been hers? And why had it been hidden under the house? The mystery began to tug at her mind. What was the connection between her grandmother and this hidden treasure? And more importantly, what was it that had been buried so carefully beneath the house all these years? For the first time in days, the unease that had been simmering inside her shifted into something else. Curiosity. This was no ordinary discovery, and something told her that whatever came next would change everything. After the discovery, she sat there in the crawl space for what felt like an eternity, holding the metal box in her hands. The ring sparkled dimly in the beam of her flashlight, and the letters, though faded, seemed to whisper secrets from the past. Her heart raced as she carefully set the box aside and pulled the first letter from the bundle. The handwriting was elegant, but there was an urgency to it, as if the writer feared their words might never reach their intended reader. She couldn't help but feel like an intruder in someone else's story. But the more she read, the more the mystery deepened. The letters were addressed to her grandmother, and they were full of passionate words, words of love, longing, and regret. The writer, whose name she learned was Thomas, seemed to be a man deeply in love with her grandmother, but the letters painted a picture of a love that had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. As she read, it became clear that Margaret, her grandmother, had been in love with someone else before she married her grandfather, someone she had kept hidden, even from her closest family members. The letters spoke of their secret meetings, the stolen moments they shared under the cover of darkness. They spoke of dreams, of a life they could have had together if only the world had allowed them to be free. The more she read, the more confused she became. How could she have known nothing about this? Her grandmother had never mentioned Thomas or any man other than her grandfather. The woman who had always seemed so content with her quiet, unremarkable life had secretly carried a heart full of longing for someone else. But it wasn't just the letters that intrigued her. It was the mention of something hidden beneath the house. Each letter ended with a cryptic phrase. "Beneath the little house by the willow tree, you'll find what I've left behind." At first, she thought it was just a metaphor, some way for Thomas to express his eternal love. But as she looked down at the small velvet pouch in the ring, she began to wonder. Could there be more hidden here? Could the box she found be just the beginning of something much bigger? She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she couldn't help herself. There was something about the mystery of it all that tugged at her, something that made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a discovery that could change everything. She tucked the letters and the box back into the small compartment, carefully covering it with dirt once again. Her hands trembled as she stood up and dusted herself off. The sun had already begun to set, casting long shadows across the yard, and she realized just how much time had passed while she was reading. She had lost herself in the world of these letters, in the world of Thomas and Margaret. For a moment, she considered leaving the box hidden under the house, keeping the mystery to herself. But she couldn't. Something inside her urged her to keep digging to uncover the truth behind these words. She had to know who Thomas was and what happened to him. And more importantly, she had to understand why her grandmother had kept this secret for so long. That night, as she lay in bed, the house felt quieter than ever. The creaking noises she had noticed earlier seemed to have faded away, and the air felt still. It was almost as if the house was waiting, as if it knew that something was about to change. She couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with questions and possibilities. What if Thomas had been her true love, the man she was meant to be with? What if her grandmother had never truly loved her grandfather, but had settled for him out of duty, out of obligation? It seemed impossible to imagine, but the letters suggested otherwise. She thought about her grandmother's life, her quiet, peaceful life, the way she had always seemed so content. But now she wondered if that contentment had been a facade, a way of hiding the pain she must have carried for so many years. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice in her head, the way it always sounded when she talked about the past. "I've lived a full life," she'd say. "I have no regrets." But now, with the letters in her hands, it felt like those words weren't true. She had regrets. There had been a love that had slipped through her fingers, a love that had been lost to time and circumstance. And now, years later, it had been uncovered in the dust and dirt beneath the house. The next morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside her. She knew she had to do something, but she wasn't sure what. The mystery was consuming her. She couldn't just leave it alone, so she decided to take a walk around the property, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. As she wandered through the small woods behind the house, she found herself drawn to the old willow tree. The tree had always been there, towering above the land like a silent guardian, its branches swaying gently in the wind. It had always been a place of comfort for her as a child, a place where she had played hide-and-seek with her cousins, or sat quietly with a book in her hands. But today it felt different. Today it felt like the key to everything. She stood beneath the tree looking up at its long, sweeping branches. For a moment she just breathed, feeling the stillness around her. And then she began to wonder, what if this was where it all began? What if the secret her grandmother had kept hidden all those years had started right here, beneath the willow tree? The ground around the tree was soft and damp from the morning dew, and she knelt down to inspect it more closely. She ran her hands over the earth, feeling for any signs of something unusual. There was no obvious disturbance in the soil, no sign that anything had been buried there. But the letters had mentioned it, beneath the house by the willow tree. A thought occurred to her. Maybe Thomas had left something more than just letters. Maybe there was something else, something physical, hidden right under the tree. Could there be another box, a piece of jewelry, or even something that would explain the mystery once and for all? Her curiosity was now fully ignited. She didn't waste any more time. She began to dig carefully at first, then with increasing urgency. The earth was soft, yielding to her hands as she uncovered the roots of the willow tree. She paused for a moment, breathless, unsure if she was being too hasty. But then she reminded herself the letters had led her here. They had spoken of a secret. This was her chance to uncover the truth. Minutes passed, and her fingers were covered in dirt, but there was still nothing. She was starting to feel like she might be chasing shadows when, suddenly, her hand hit something hard. Her heart skipped a beat as she carefully cleared away the soil, revealing another object. A small, weathered wooden box, much like the one she had found beneath the house. It was buried just inches from the roots of the tree, almost as if it had been placed there with great care. Her breath caught in her throat as she gently lifted the box from its resting place. This time she didn't hesitate. She opened it quickly, her hands trembling with anticipation. Inside the box were more letters, more photographs, but there was something else too. A small gold locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful in its own way. She opened the locket, and inside was a small picture of a young woman and a man. The woman was familiar, her grandmother Margaret. But the man beside her was not her grandfather. It was Thomas. The truth was beginning to unfold before her eyes, and with it, the realization that her grandmother's secret was far bigger than she could have ever imagined. She sat on the ground beneath the willow tree, the small wooden box resting in her lap. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the locket, its faded gold surface reflecting the weak sunlight filtering through the branches. Inside, the picture of the young woman, her grandmother, and the man she now knew as Thomas filled her thoughts. This was the man who had written those passionate letters, the man who had loved her grandmother with all his heart. It felt surreal to her, as though she had stumbled upon a hidden world, one her grandmother had carried with her for years. She wondered why her grandmother had never mentioned Thomas, never hinted at the love they had shared. Had she truly forgotten him, or had she kept him buried in the deepest corner of her heart? The locket seemed to carry an emotional weight far greater than its small size suggested. She opened it again, running her fingers over the delicate image of Thomas. He looked so young, his eyes full of hope and promise. But it was clear from the way he gazed at her grandmother in the photograph that their love had been intense and real. As she held the locket in her hand, a new wave of questions swept over her. What had happened to Thomas? Why hadn't her grandmother ever spoken of him? And what was the true story behind their love? She knew that these answers were buried somewhere beneath the house under the roots of the willow tree, and in the pages of the letters that Thomas had written. The mystery was becoming more than she had bargained for, and yet she couldn't stop herself from wanting to know the truth. Each discovery only led to more questions. She had to keep going, had to keep digging. She returned to the small house, the box and locket safely tucked into her bag. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land, but the house felt colder than usual, almost as if it were aware of the secrets she was uncovering. She sat at her small wooden table, surrounded by the letters she had found earlier. The soft light from the lamp overhead illuminated the faded ink, casting delicate shadows on the yellowed pages. The more she read, the more she understood the depth of the connection between Thomas and her grandmother. Their love was intense, but it was also doomed from the start. Thomas had been a poor, uneducated worker, while her grandmother had come from a well-established family with higher expectations for her future. They were from different worlds, and society had no place for their love. But despite the barriers between them, Thomas and her grandmother had continued their secret relationship for years. The letters painted a picture of a forbidden love, one that could not be brought into the light. Thomas had spoken of his dreams of running away with her grandmother, of building a life together far from the pressures of her family. But as time went on, the letters grew more desperate. Thomas wrote about the pain of being apart, the hopelessness he felt as he watched her marry someone else, a man chosen for her, someone who could provide stability and a future. The last few letters were filled with sorrow and resignation. Thomas had finally given up on the idea of ever being with her grandmother, though his love for her never seemed to fade. In the final letter, written just before he disappeared, he mentioned something strange. "I have buried something beneath the house by the willow tree. It's the only thing I can leave behind. I hope it will be enough to remind you of me, even when time has taken me away." Those last words lingered in her mind, echoing through the quiet room. What had Thomas buried under the house? What was so important that he had wanted her grandmother to find it, even after so many years? And why had he disappeared without a trace? Her mind was racing. She had already found one box beneath the house, but Thomas had written about something more. There had to be something else hidden there, something that would answer the questions that were now consuming her. She couldn't wait any longer. She had to return to the house, had to find whatever it was that Thomas had left behind. That night, she made her way back to the crawl space beneath the house. The moonlight cast long shadows across the yard as she crawled into the damp, dark space once again. Her flashlight flickered in the darkness, casting an eerie glow on the old wooden beams that supported the structure. Her heart was pounding as she carefully navigated the narrow passage, her eyes scanning the dirt floor for any signs of a hidden compartment or object. She knew what she was looking for. Another box. Another piece of the puzzle. She had to find it. Minutes passed, and her breath grew shallow as she dug through the dirt, brushing aside the loose earth with her hands. She could feel the weight of the air in the small space, the silence surrounding her as she worked. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover its secrets. Finally, after what felt like hours, her fingers brushed against something hard, a piece of wood. Her heart skipped a beat as she pulled it free from the dirt, revealing a small, weathered crate. It was just like the others, old, faded, and covered in grime. She could hardly believe it. This was it. This was what Thomas had left behind. With trembling hands, she pried open the crate. Inside, there was something wrapped in cloth. She carefully unwrapped it, her hands shaking as she pulled back the layers. What she found inside made her gasp. It was a small journal, its leather cover cracked with age. The pages inside were yellowed and fragile, but they were filled with Thomas's handwriting. She opened the first page, the words faint but legible. "I don't know how long I can keep this secret, but I love her, and I will love her forever, no matter what happens." The journal was filled with entries that detailed Thomas's feelings for her grandmother, his hopes for their future, and the pain he had felt when they had been torn apart. It was clear that the love he had for her grandmother was not a fleeting affair. It was something deep and all-consuming, a love that had stayed with him throughout his life. There were also notes about his disappearance, about his decision to leave and never return. It seemed that after her grandmother married someone else, Thomas had left the area, unable to bear the thought of living in the same town while she was with another man. But as the years passed, he had never truly let go of her. Even after her death, he had continued to carry his love for her. And now, in the final pages of the journal, he wrote of his desire for her to know the truth. The last entry was dated just before he vanished, and it sent a chill down her spine. "I will leave this behind beneath the house by the willow tree. Perhaps someday someone will find it and understand the truth of what we had. But I must go now. I don't know if I will ever return, but I will always love her. Forever." She sat there staring at the journal in her hands, a wave of emotions crashing over her. The journal was more than just a collection of memories. It was a testament to the depth of Thomas's love for her grandmother, and it was now a part of her own story as well. For a moment, she sat quietly in the crawl space, the weight of everything she had learned settling in. She thought about the love her grandmother had hidden, the life that could have been, and the secrets that had been buried for so long. She wondered if her grandmother had ever thought about Thomas after all these years. Had she ever regretted not running away with him? Or had she truly moved on, finding happiness in the life she had built with her husband? The answers were elusive, but one thing was clear. Her grandmother had carried a piece of this secret with her all her life, and now it was in her hands. The mystery was no longer just about the past. It was about the choices people make, the loves they carry, and the things they leave behind. She slowly folded the journal back into the cloth, holding it carefully as she climbed out of the crawl space. As she made her way back to the house, she felt a sense of connection to both Thomas and her grandmother, a sense of understanding that had been missing before. The house, with all its creaks and mysteries, had become more than just a place. It was a repository of memories, of love, and of the things that had shaped the lives of those who had lived there before her. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but one thing was certain: she was no longer alone in this house. The past was alive within its walls, and she was ready to listen. The morning after she found the journal, she woke up early, still holding the small leather-bound book in her hands. The events of the previous day felt almost surreal, as though they hadn't truly happened. But the weight of the journal was real, and its pages filled with Thomas's words were alive with emotions she hadn't expected to feel. She sat by the window, looking out over the yard, the same view her grandmother had probably gazed at countless times. The willow tree stood tall in the distance, its long branches swaying gently in the breeze. It was hard to believe that something so significant, something so emotional, had been buried under the roots of that tree for so many years. It seemed as though the past and present were colliding, merging in a way she hadn't anticipated. But the more she thought about it, the more she understood her grandmother's secret, Thomas's love, and all the years of unspoken feelings had been waiting for her, just beneath the surface. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to uncover. The journal had given her a glimpse into the emotional depth of Thomas's love for her grandmother, but it didn't explain everything. Why had Thomas disappeared without a trace? Why hadn't her grandmother ever spoken of him again, even after all these years? She needed answers, but she wasn't sure where to start. She had already found 2 boxes, one under the house and one beneath the willow tree, each containing pieces of the puzzle. Yet the more she uncovered, the more questions emerged. There had to be something else, something that would complete the story. She made herself a cup of coffee, the steam rising from the mug and filling the quiet room. As the warmth of the drink settled in her hands, she looked around the small house. It was an old place, filled with memories of her grandmother's life, a life that had been full of quiet moments and simple joys. But now, with everything she had learned, it felt as though she was living in the middle of a hidden history. The walls of the house seemed to hold on to secrets, waiting for her to uncover them. It wasn't long before the urge to keep searching returned. She needed to know more. She needed to understand everything about Thomas, about her grandmother, and about the life they could have had together if only things had been different. After a few moments of hesitation, she grabbed the journal and left the house. The yard was bathed in the soft light of the morning sun, and she walked slowly toward the willow tree, feeling drawn to it as if it were calling her. The tree had been there for generations, watching over the land, and it felt like the right place to continue her search. She had already uncovered part of the secret beneath its roots, but something told her that she hadn't found everything. There was more hidden in the soil, more waiting to be discovered. She knelt down again, this time in a different spot near the tree, her fingers brushing the earth. The soil was soft, the ground cool beneath her touch. She felt as if she were reconnecting with the past, as if the earth itself held the answers she was seeking. She dug carefully, taking her time, as though the very act of searching would bring clarity to the mystery that had been unfolding. Hours passed, but her determination didn't waver. It was almost as if the search itself had become a part of her, as if she were unraveling something that had been meant for her all along. The journal, the letters, the photographs, the locket, all of them had come together to tell a story. But that story was incomplete. There was something more. She could feel it in her bones. Finally, her hand hit something hard, a solid object beneath the surface. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. Could this be it? Could this be the final piece of the puzzle? With trembling fingers, she cleared away the dirt and uncovered a small, weathered metal box, much like the others she had found. Her heart skipped a beat as she carefully pried it open. Inside, there was a bundle of old papers tied with a faded red ribbon. The papers were worn and yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. Her hands shook as she untied the ribbon, unfolding the papers one by one. They were letters, written by her grandmother. She sat back on her heels, her mind racing. What were these letters? Why had her grandmother written them? And why had they been hidden here beneath the willow tree, along with the other relics of Thomas's love? The first letter was dated many years after her grandmother had married her grandfather. It was clear from the tone that her grandmother had never truly forgotten Thomas. In the letter, she wrote about the years that had passed since he had disappeared and how she had never been able to fully let go of him. She spoke of the love they had shared, the bond they had formed, and the emptiness she had felt when he was no longer in her life. But as time went on, her grandmother had tried to move forward, to accept the life that had been chosen for her. She had married a man she didn't love, a man who had provided stability but never the passion that Thomas had given her. The letter was heartbreaking in its honesty, revealing a side of her grandmother that had never been visible before. She spoke of the regret she carried, the pain she had lived with in silence. But she also spoke of the joy she had found in the family she had created, in the children she had raised. The letter was full of conflicting emotions, love, regret, and a deep sense of loss. There was another letter dated just a few months before her grandmother's death. In it, her grandmother wrote about the love she had for her family, but also about the unanswered questions that had haunted her all her life. She wrote about Thomas and how she had never fully understood why he had disappeared. She never knew if he had left because he had been heartbroken, or if something else had forced him to go. But the letter ended with a promise. I will always love you, Thomas. No matter where life takes me, you will always be in my heart. Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the final words. Her grandmother had never stopped loving Thomas. She had carried that love with her all her life, even though she had never spoken of it. It was as if her grandmother had lived with a piece of her heart forever locked away, unable to move forward because part of her had always belonged to Thomas. The realization hit her with a heavy weight. Her grandmother had never been truly happy. She had settled for a life that was safe and secure, but not the one she had truly wanted. And all these years, her grandmother had kept the secret buried inside, afraid to share it with anyone, not even her own family. For a long time, she sat there holding the letters in her hands, unable to speak. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the yard, and the stillness of the moment seemed to speak volumes. She had uncovered something profound, something that would forever change the way she saw her grandmother, and the way she understood the choices people make in their lives. She stood up slowly, the letter still clutched in her hand, and walked back toward the house. The weight of the discovery was heavy, but it was also a relief. She had finally uncovered the truth, the full truth about her grandmother's life and the love she had lost. It was a bittersweet realization, one that she would carry with her forever. As she walked through the door of the house, she knew that she would never look at it the same way again. The walls, the floorboards, and even the air seemed to hold the echoes of a life that had been lived with love, loss, and regret. Her grandmother had never spoken of Thomas, but now, through these letters, she had given her a glimpse into a world she had never known. She sat down at the table once again, the letters spread out before her. There was one final letter, smaller than the others, folded neatly in the corner of the bundle. She opened it slowly, and her heart raced as she read the final words. "I hope someday you will find this and understand. I never wanted you to carry my secrets, but if you do, I hope it brings you peace just as it has brought me. Always remember, love is a gift, not a burden." Her grandmother had known. She had known that someday someone would find the truth, and she had left it behind, not as a burden, but as a gift. And now, the gift was hers to carry. She sat at the small wooden table, the final letter from her grandmother resting in front of her. Her fingers traced the words again, the delicate script still legible despite the years that had passed. "Always remember, love is a gift, not a burden." Those words felt heavy, filled with meaning. They weren't just a message about love. They were about letting go of the past and allowing the future to be shaped by the truth. It had been a week since she uncovered the last set of letters in the journal. A week since she had learned the truth about the love her grandmother had lost. The emotions of that discovery still swirled inside her. But now, as the days had passed, she felt something else. A sense of peace. The pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place, and though the truth was bittersweet, it was hers to carry forward. Her grandmother's secret was no longer buried. It was part of her story now, a part she could hold on to. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the house settle around her. The silence wasn't oppressive, it was comforting. The house felt different now, as if it were a place that had been waiting for this truth to come to light. Her grandmother had lived here, had loved here, had carried so many hidden pieces of herself within these walls, and now those pieces were out in the open. She thought back to the first time she had come to this house. It had been years ago, a place to escape, a place to reconnect with her roots. She had loved her grandmother deeply, but like many families, they hadn't been particularly close. It wasn't until her grandmother's passing that she had felt the desire to understand more about the woman who had shaped her childhood. The discovery of the boxes beneath the house, the locket, the journal, all of it had come as a surprise, and yet now it felt like it had been meant to happen. In a way, she felt like she had inherited not just a house, but a legacy that came with its own burdens and its own beauty. She couldn't just leave it behind. She had to do something with this knowledge. She had to make it matter. That afternoon, she went outside to the garden, the place where her grandmother had spent so many hours tending to flowers and vegetables. The garden had always been a source of comfort for her grandmother, a place of peace and solitude. Now it felt like a place of reflection for her as well. She knelt down beside the flower bed where her grandmother had planted roses, the same roses that had bloomed every spring. The soft scent of the flowers mixed with the cool afternoon air. It was in this garden that she realized something. All the love her grandmother had held for Thomas, all the regret she had carried in silence, it hadn't been wasted. It had shaped her grandmother into the woman she had been. Her grandmother had never been able to live the life she wanted, but that didn't mean she hadn't lived a life full of purpose. She had raised a family, built a home, and provided love and care to those who mattered most. Her grandmother's life hadn't been defined by a single choice, a single relationship. It had been defined by the love she had given, even if that love had never been fully returned in the way she had hoped. In the end, her grandmother had made peace with it, perhaps without even realizing she had. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that realization. Her grandmother's love for Thomas wasn't a burden. It wasn't a mistake. It had been a part of who she was, and in some strange way, it had led her to this point. And now, that love could live on in a different form. She could share the story, could tell the world about the love that had once been hidden, the love that had shaped a life. With that thought, a sense of determination filled her. She knew what she had to do next. The house had always felt like it belonged to her grandmother, but now it felt like it belonged to her too. It was her heritage, her legacy, and it was time to make it hers in a new way. She couldn't just leave it as it was. She needed to create something new out of what had been handed down to her, something that honored the past while looking forward to the future. She spent the next few weeks cleaning out the attic and sorting through boxes of old belongings. It was a strange process going through all the things her grandmother had kept. But each item, each scrap of paper, each photograph told a story. She found letters from long-lost friends, old recipe books, and even a journal from her grandmother's youth. Before Thomas, before all the heartache. In a way, it was like rediscovering her grandmother all over again. As she worked, she began to see the house not as a place full of ghosts and regrets, but as a place full of memories that needed to be honored. It wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. This house had been built with love and hard work, and she could feel that in every beam, every floorboard. She began to plan how she would move forward. The house was no longer a burden, it was a symbol. She would turn it into a place where stories could be shared, where people could come together to celebrate the love and life her grandmother had lived. Maybe she would start a small writing group, or perhaps host storytelling nights, where people could come and share their own stories of love and loss, of finding peace after years of silence. She realized that, just like her grandmother, she had lived in silence for too long. The house could be a place where voices were heard, where stories weren't buried, where the past could live alongside the present. One day, as she sat in the living room surrounded by the treasures of her grandmother's life, she found herself reading the journal again. This time the words didn't hit her like a wave of sadness. Instead, they felt like a beginning, not an end. Thomas's words about leaving behind a piece of himself felt less like a farewell and more like an invitation. He had wanted her grandmother to remember him, but not in sorrow. He had wanted her to remember the love they had shared and to find peace with it, and that was what she was going to do. She would find peace with it. She had already started to. The house had once been a place of secrets, but now it would be a place of understanding. She would share the story of Thomas and her grandmother, and by doing so, she would let go of the pain that had come with keeping those secrets locked away. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments when she questioned if she was doing the right thing. But she knew in her heart that she was honoring both her grandmother and the love that had been lost. She would create something new from the past, something that could bring people together instead of keeping them apart. Her grandmother's secret was no longer hers to carry alone. It was something she could share, something that could bring healing. The love between her grandmother and Thomas was a part of history, but it was also a part of her own story now. And she would tell that story, not as a sad tale of unrequited love, but as a story of life, of love, of choices, and of letting go. As she stood up and looked out the window, she realized that the house had become more than just a home. It had become a bridge between the past and the future, a place where stories could be told and understood. It was no longer a place of silence, it was a place of connection. And in that connection, she had found her peace.